Hi, in this short video I'm going to talk about the basic user interface in PISim. PISim has a standard menu bar along the top. The file menu allows us to do a couple of things. The first thing is to select a new configuration, and if we do that we're offered a choice of simulations that we can actually run in PISim. So let's pick the two-tank simulation. In this case the simulation model loads, but there's no configuration, no control configuration over the top of it. So it's open for us to create a new configuration on that one. We can also open a previous configuration. In this case let's load the one for the stirred tank. And you can see that the control configuration itself is loaded onto the P&I diagram, but also the layout of the devices on the window is restored, as well as any devices that have been pasted onto backgrounds. So we actually have the 4 controllers and an indicator pasted onto this simulated control panel here, another one over there, and an annunciator panel that we had previously created down there. So it restores absolutely everything. On the file menu as well, we can save the configuration and we can change the name of the configuration. We can exit the program too. Along from the file menu we have the backgrounds menu, and if we click add a background, the first thing it does is ask us to give a title for the background, and this is really just for the user to keep track of what backgrounds have been defined. Once you've done that, you can choose a image file that you want to put onto the background, and this can be anything. You can use any image file that you want, photograph your cat or whatever, but normally you would be wanting to choose something that could represent a control panel, or might represent a SCADA page if you're using SCADA components on the configuration. So that's the background window. We can just get rid of that one just now. You can see that some backgrounds have been created in this configuration and have devices stuck on them. To move the devices individually, I can unlock them from the background, which lets me move it about. And then once I'm happy with the position of the device, I can relock it. If I'm not happy with the background at all and decide I want to get rid of it, well, I can remove all the devices from it individually and delete it. Or alternatively, I can just delete the background window itself, and the devices automatically move on to their own barge windows. So that just happens, and these things can then be moved about or stuck onto another background if I wanted to. I could stick it on there. So I can move it anywhere I want. To delete the individual devices, the only way of actually doing that is to reconfigure the component on the P&I diagram. So if we wanted to get rid of this controller window, we would actually have to redefine this device as not being a controller, and that would then delete the device. Underneath the main menu bar, we actually have the simulation controls. The first thing we've got is the sim time, the simulation time, and that shows the current time in the simulation. When we run the simulation, this time is set to the current real time, and it keeps pace with real time while we're running the simulation. It can get ahead of real time if we actually choose to accelerate time in the simulation, or if we choose to use what's called a zip, which I'll explain in a couple of minutes. These buttons here on the simulation toolbar actually are the control buttons for the simulation. The first one starts the simulation running. So you can see that this is now moving forward in 1 second intervals. When we press the run button, it resets the simulation to its initial state. So it's a way to always start from the same place as just by pressing the run button. Next we have the pause button, which is a toggle button, and what the pause button does is it pauses the simulation. So you can see we've got 28, we can pause it and restart it at 29. So this gives you a chance to pause the simulation, have a look at the value of some of the variables, and then to restart the simulation but retain the current value of all the simulation variables. Pressing the stop button will actually stop the simulation altogether. All the values of the simulation variables will be retained, so you can look at things, you can look at plots and what have you, and they'll be retained until you restart the simulation by pressing the run button, at which point the simulation resets to its initial state. Along from the stop button we have the acceleration button, and this has a number of different levels of acceleration. So if we go up to 40 times acceleration, and then have a look at what the simulation time's doing. You can see it's now leaping ahead of real time. It's going 40 times faster. 1 second is 40 seconds of simulation time. The acceleration sticks, so if you want to reset it to real time, you have to go in here and click that back to 1 second. The next button is the zip button, and we use zip to actually shoot forward in the simulation by a fixed time interval. So let's say we wanted to leap forward 500 seconds. So we type in 500 there, and you can see the current simulation time is 14:27:14. So we're going to zip forward 500 seconds, click OK, and the simulation time suddenly leaps to 14:35:34. Now those 500 seconds have been simulated. Okay, so the simulation model has been run. It's just that it's been run as quickly as the computer is able to do it. So we're breaking the link between real time and simulation time. We're just running the thing as fast as we possibly can. When the zip is finished, the simulation drops into pause mode, so it gives you a chance to have a look about to see what's happened during the zip. The zip is really useful when you're running tests on a simulation which is a very slow process model. Long time constants in the model. On the left hand side of the main window we actually have the diagram tools. At the moment this looks a bit sparse and we've only got one component on it, this bubble here, but we will be adding more to this sort of toolbar as PISim develops. And selecting the editing tool at the top puts the diagram into editing mode. In this mode you can make and break connections between the various components, and you can configure them as well. All the components in the diagram can be configured in the editing mode. The cursor is kind of sensitive to where you put it, so as you move it over various points, the cursor will actually change to show what you can do. So if we move the cursor over a component output port, so this is the output port from the controller, it's going to this control valve here. If we move it over the output port, you can see we've got this sort of wire icon, and that represents a connection. Whoops, missed it. It represents a connection, so if I actually click and drag, where are we? This represents a connection, and if I click on it, what's happened here? Oh, I know what's happened. It's because we're actually still running the simulation. When the simulation's running, editing's actually blocked, so you can't actually do things to it. So we'll just stop it there and then try and drag a connection across. Okay, so that's the over an output port. If we go over an input port, this is the measurement input into the controller, you can see we get a cutter icon. So this can be used to break connections. We always break connections at the input port end and make connections from the output port end. So we drag from the output port of a device, in this case the flow transmitter, into the input port of the controller. Finally, moving the cursor over the component itself changes it to this sort of finger thing, and then if I right click on here, I get a menu that allows me to either delete the component or to configure it. I can go into the configuration menu and set up the devices I want, ranges, tuning constants, things like that. To add a new component to a diagram, all I do is I click the component that I want to add and then move the mouse cursor back over the diagram. You can see when it moves onto the diagram it becomes a stamp, and every time I press the mouse button it actually leaves a copy of the device or the component on the diagram. Now these 5 things that I've put on the diagram are all individual components, and they can all now be configured and set up to be controllers, indicators, alarms, whatever I want. I hope you found this useful, and thanks for watching.